Hola, hoy, hello, multicultural audience. You can say hello in your first language in the chat. And thanks for joining the second webinar of New Ways of Teaching and BBL Professional Development webinar series for English language teachers called Working with Intercultural Communities of Teachers. This topic is particularly relevant today in remote teaching as it's easier to communicate with teachers and students from other countries. This webinar is part of a British Council program called New Ways of Teaching. Let me show you the second slide that shows that this program promotes ongoing training for those involved in the educational process through tips, podcasts, webinars, reports, digital tools, and expert partners. The British Council intends to support teachers and education policymakers by providing the tools required to withstand the crisis and the constant changes in education. So please sign up for the New Ways of Teaching newsletter. The link will be shared in the chat by our dear Graham Stanley. So if you sign up, you'll receive more tips directly into your inbox and you'll keep updated with the latest news. Don't miss all the wealth of resources that New Ways of Teaching offers for teachers, leaders, and policymakers. And another announcement is save the date for the coming webinars. The 30th of September, the benefits of teacher development for your daily work and career plans. The 28th of October, climate change in English language education. The 25th of November, remote teaching, online learning. The 16th of December, gender in English language education. And in 2022, the BBL conference, a taster. So a link will be shared in the chat for the events calendar. Register to any of the coming webinars after this talk. And another announcement, stay with us for your certificate of attendance. That will be, a link will be shared at the end of this webinar, and for the question and answer. So Graham, can we introduce our speakers today?
Yes, Alicia, our speakers, we're still waiting for our speakers to actually come into the room, but they're on their way. So I think let's start by introducing them both, and then hopefully by the time you finish, they'll be here. Great.
So there are two experts today to talk about interculturality, and they both work with intercultural communities that will inspire you with their experiences in Brazil and Peru. One of the speakers is Mariela Condorena Mamani from Peru. She was a former champion teacher who participated in the program in 2016 and 2019. Having been part of this program enabled her to lead a teachers learning community, English teachers in Peru, in the remote Andean region of Puno, almost 4,000 meters above sea level. Mariela holds an ELT degree from the National Pedagogical Institute Arequipa. She's part of the Top Teachers 2020 program organized by the Ministry of Education in Peru and British Council. Currently, she works as the English language teacher at José Galvez High School in Chuncucho, Puno. She guided an English project based on enhancing the English language communicative competencies in an intercultural context. So when Mariela arrives, we say, Bienvenida, Mariela. Our other speaker is Rodrigo Guimaraes Prudente Marques Cotrim from Brazil. He holds a PhD in linguistics from the University of Brasilia, Laboratory of Indigenous Languages and Literatures. He has experience in teaching English as an intercultural language in bi-tree multilingual context, based on intercultural, transdisciplinary and translinguistic teaching theories and approaches. He also has experience in documentation, description, and analysis of Brazilian indigenous language and in the production of intercultural pedagogical material. Currently, he works as a professor at the State University of Goiás. Areas of interest include the following topics: intercultural English, bilingual education, intercultural language teaching, transdisciplinarity, and translinguistics. So this first slide shows the school that Mariela works currently, and Jose Galvez High School, Chungusho Puno. And this is the community that Rodrigo has worked with. So if our speakers have arrived, we can, without further ado, get started. Or whenever you say, Graham.
Sorry, Alicia, we're still waiting for our speakers. Apologies, everybody. They are on their way. They have the links. I think they're just having a little bit of a problem connecting. But while we're waiting, I think it would be interesting to hear from the audience about what experience of working with intercultural communities they have. So it would be very useful for everybody just to write some of your brief reflections in the question and answer section, and we'll publish them. If you can let us know what experience you have working with intercultural communities in your classroom. And also, if you have any questions for the speakers, we'll be collecting those as the webinar proceeds. So you can start by writing those questions as well. What is it that is meant by intercultural communication, for example? Is that something that you can answer, Alicia? What for you is intercultural communication?
Well, Graham, I have worked with communities within the Americas, and even though we have lots of similarities when working with teachers and students from Chile, from Uruguay, from Brazil, from Peru, there are lots of similarities and lots of differences. We have to be culturally aware of those differences when we face the classroom, and we have to pick up the resources, the right resources, know about their music, their culture, their habits, and all that data that's so important to collect before starting teaching. You cannot just produce a lesson that fits everyone if you are culturally aware. And there's a lot to be learned, especially when you work in other areas, in different areas of the country, whether it's rural or urban or difficult context. And it's extremely important for a lesson to be successful to know who you are teaching and what their background is.
Definitely, that's a very good summary, I think. Still waiting for our speakers to come in, so maybe we can continue by saying a few of the questions that we have for them when they do come in, just so we can preview for those of everybody who are patiently waiting what we'll be doing. So the first one is this: how did you become involved in teaching in intercultural context, and what's your teaching context? What about the second one? Let's just run through them quickly, I think, Alicia, just while we're waiting.
Well, the context that Rodrigo has worked with is an indigenous context. He shared a link with us where he published his experience of working with an indigenous community, and also he mentioned in our previous talk, previous to this webinar, that all the materials that they produced and they created were tailor-made for the situation. And of course, they had to be, the learning of English had to be relevant for the community. What are they learning English for? This is a picture of our speaker, Rodrigo, with an indigenous student, and how he managed to learn from this community, and when creating and organizing and planning his lessons. This is the context Chunchusho in Peru, where Mariela had her experience, multicultural experience, and this is her school. She also mentioned the same thing, that the challenge for them is to communicate with their students because they they have a different language, and also to create materials that are relevant for them in this context. Maybe the audience wants to share what their teaching context is and what the challenge is when teaching a bi or tri or multilingual context. If it's the same, is it materials? Is it the language of the students? Is it the culture itself? And where do you get the materials from? From the same community, from leaders? I don't know if there's any answer coming up from the audience.
Yes, there is. I can.
Good.
I think it would be useful for me to say what some of the audience members have been saying about interculturality. We have a question from Dominga Valenzuela. Does interculturality take into consideration other backgrounds as well, social context, or just different countries? That's an interesting question, isn't it? I think we will have to wait for the definitive answer from our speakers who are on their way, I'm sure. But what do you think, Alicia? Do you think interculturality should actually take into account other things than just the country where someone was born? I think it does. Do you?
Yeah, I think it's a great number of things that need to be considered. Yeah, it's the culture, the language, the way they've been learning as well. What's relevant for them? In the case of teaching English, why is English important for them in their community or in their work, or in promoting the place where they live? There are a big number of things. Just by experiencing teaching students in Uruguay, there are a number of words which are different, even if the language is the same. The music is different, their habits, the way the dress code. There are a number of things that need to be considered when planning a lesson if you want the lesson to be successful, and to personalize the lesson so they can see their culture reflected. Normally what's been successful is to gather information through surveys or just asking students questions all the time before presenting a lesson, and say, okay, the lesson is going to be about shops. Let's find out whether there are shops, what kind of shops are there, have them and see them in the Google map and see what they look like. And what people do, and then plan the lesson accordingly.
I think you're absolutely right. That's really good advice. I remember that as you know, I used to work in Uruguay, and we had a lot of teachers who were based in Argentina teaching into Uruguay. And some of the differences, even though there's a very short distance between Uruguay and Argentina, at least Buenos Aires, where a lot of the teachers were teaching from, it was amazing just to see how many cultural differences there were between the two societies, which reflected in all sorts of things that needed to be taken into account in the classroom, which is fine. I've got another question, or rather not a question, but a comment from Suzel Esquivel from Cuba, who says, I personally don't have much experience working directly with intercultural communities of teachers. However, by sharing with different colleagues, teachers from different contexts, I've perceived how different our teaching contexts are and how this influences our practice. So sharing is very interesting and enriching. Also, learning more about interculturality and all around this topic is really important. I think Suzel is absolutely right with this. I think we can only learn from each other. We can learn so much from each other by just sharing our knowledge and experience, talking to other colleagues, meeting in all sorts of ways in communities of practice, etc. I don't know, Alicia, have you had experience yourself of learning from colleagues from other countries and other cultures that has affected the way you think about teaching and learning?
Definitely. I had the experience of writing course books for Brazil, and I remember that we first wrote a draft of a typical lesson. I don't remember the topic of it, but let's say that it was introductions, as usually course book starts. And then after research and after visiting schools and after talking to teachers and students, we had to actually start all over again. Yeah, nothing of what had been produced was useful because it didn't reflect what the people, the way the people introduced themselves. So it was extremely important to do this research part before actually start writing. In the case of planning a lesson, I think this research could be just a number of questions, an interview, talking to locals and see, okay, what's relevant and what am I going to include in my lesson plan. I don't think the topic of interculturality has to be only with minorities of like indigenous people. It's just being aware that if you're teaching remotely, the other and the others belong to a different culture. You need to find out what they do, what they like, what they don't like, what the kind of humor they have, the things that the way they name certain things, their habits. It's extremely important to have an initial conversation with that community before planning the lesson. It's the same as with any other kind of diversity. Yeah? It's like as people are diverse in many ways, we normally speak of diversity in terms of language levels, and then we do something about it. So it's not a question of just preparing a lesson about pets, for example, without knowing if people actually have pets, what kind of pets they have, if they do. I remember writing for Hong Kong a number of books, and the culture was so different that I had to rewrite things all over and over again. Because, for example, the typical birthday party, I created a unit on celebrations, and then the editor said, okay, people don't celebrate parties in their homes because they don't have space. So they normally go to their grandparents' houses, and because the older people have small gardens in the outskirts of the city, and that's where kids normally celebrate their birthday parties. So being aware of the culture you're teaching is extremely important. Otherwise, the student would see that as, I don't know, this is not me, this is fiction, this is happening somewhere else. And when talking and doing homework, then they will probably copy from the model, but the model means nothing to them unless it's tailor-made for the culture.
Yes, that's lots of very interesting reflections there, I think, Alicia. Thank you. I think we do have Mariella now on the telephone to our colleague Ralph, and I think Ralph was going to suggest trying to see if the audio would work using that way. So Ralph, if you want to unmute, and then let's see. Mariella, can you hear us?
Mariela, can you speak now?
Yeah, yes, I can speak now. Hello, everyone. I'm Mariela Condorena. I am very grateful for the invitation to this event. I wish to extend a warm greeting to all of you, dear colleagues. And now it's time to talk about my context, yeah? I don't know if I...
Yeah, Mariela, thank you.
Yeah.
Bienvenida.
Okay, very, yeah, nice. Peru, as you know, Peru is a mega diverse country that unites multiple peoples, cultural traditions, and languages within its territory. In the early 16th century, and assume 300 to 600 different languages were spoken. Today we have three official languages: Spanish, that is Castellano; Quechua, the language of the Inca Empire; and Aymara, a native language spoken in the southern Peruvian highlands. only less than 50 indigenous languages with about 120 local dialects are left unrecognized. So about me, I have been working as an English teacher for about 12 years. I worked in Arequipa for 7 years, and I decided to come to Puno in 2016 in order to work as a permanent teacher at Jose Galvez High School, a public institution that is located in the Peruvian border between Peru and Bolivia. Yunguyo is a beautiful small town in the highlands of Peru, and I currently work as an English teacher there and pedagogical coordinator. There are 900 students. Most of them belong to the rural area. That is why they speak Aymara as their native language and Spanish as their second language. As I mentioned before, I am involved in teaching in intercultural context since I work as an English teacher here, and a great deal of the learners in my class studied in the rural towns where they live, so they had not taken any English course before reaching secondary school in their hometowns. The primary means of communication is Aymara, and Spanish is their second language. I teach third grade of secondary school, and my students are around 13 years old, and their level of English is A1. English, as you see, is the third language, and the English culture is quite distant to them. In my context as a teacher, I have faced a number of problems in my teaching practice. Students have not studied English, they feel very apprehensive and afraid when they are asked to speak English. In Peru, Spanish is the official language, so all of my students understand Spanish language, but some of them don't have a Spanish standard pronunciation because the variety of Spanish they acquire is a rural one, not the one taught at school. For that reason, they don't feel confident when they speak English either. Since I started working here as an English teacher, I have been really surprised by the local culture, customs, and a lot of local festivities in honor to some patron saints, Santos Patrones. And something that was unusual for me was to see their deep religious faith and respect for our Mother Earth, as we say here, Pachamama, and their enormous devotion to their patron saints. Thanks to this context, I found a way out for my students that involve their culture and their native language as a part of the main strategies to better the English language communicative competence.
Yeah, that's very...
As a pedagogical coordinator, yeah.
No, that's very interesting. I was just about to ask. Yeah, sure. How do you communicate with your students in Spanish or in their native language?
Okay, and as a pedagogical coordinator of the English area, I decided to create a teaching innovation project called Designing Posters Related to Local Festivities in order to foster the communicative competence of the English language, promoting inclusion and interculturality. I would like to share some details about an upcoming holiday called Casani Festival. This is an international fair here in Yunguyo, Puno, to give you an idea of the beauty of their culture and the many reasons my students have to be proud of it. On September 8th, there is an important international fair in Yunguyo, Puno. It takes place in Casani, the border between Peru and Bolivia. Around the earth of Casani, Aymara people from Peru and Bolivia practice the barter. They exchange different products without using money. For example, a Bolivian seller bartered peanuts with Peruvian quinoa, some fruit or vegetables, and a Peruvian seller bought animals like cows, alpacas, and sheep. In front of the chapel, people dance and sing in honor of the Virgin of Nativity. Also, families eat and enjoy traditional food from both countries, such as salsa conejo, pasta, and guayaque. Guayaque is an Aymara word. soles and Bolivians are the currency that people use for shopping. Aymara people share their customs here. Each culture, celebration, and festival is full of many traditions. Those experiences are the most important and useful tool we teachers use to teach English and at the same time to teach the culture and keep it alive. This is not only part of the teaching process, but rather it's a crucial part of the learning process where I have found as a teacher and as a human being the real value and my own appreciation for my roots, and I have felt immensely proud of belonging to such a diverse and awesome Peruvian culture.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mariela. That's very interesting. So I'm sure there were lots of challenges when teaching the community. And what's the big challenge of working in a bi or tri in this case context?
I'll repeat for her. I think she may not hear.
Okay.
Mariela, what's
Good.
the big challenge of working? What's the big challenge of working in bi or tri or multilingual contexts?
Okay, so in this case, as mentioned before, Peru is a rich multilingual country. I think one of the biggest challenges is to join our world. Teachers need to give themselves the time and patience to get to know how their students think, how they live, how they learn. Give them enough confidence to know that even though they are learning a new language like English that could be difficult for them, English language is a bridge, a powerful bridge to show their language and culture to the world. In class, I have always told my students that they are also my teachers because I learn from them their language, their culture, which is part of my roots as a Peruvian. I have seen that, have made them feel important and proud of their culture. And many times they feel that learning English in their context does not make sense because most people in their communities speak Spanish or Aymara. Here it is where we must show that English is a door, a bridge to cross the line and show the world that the culture lives. Another challenge that every teacher must face many times is the difference of the educational policy that changed government after government. Maybe they don't consider the importance of the intercultural, rural, bilingual, etc. context. This difference is expressed in abandoned institutions, little investment in training teachers for this context, teachers who make an effort but are not recognized, not being aware of this reality, of this need, represent an obstacle to find solutions. It is a great challenge to merge with creative alternatives in spite of police. But for our students, teachers never give up and never stop learning. So here are some lessons learned from my everyday practice with Aymara students that I would like to share with you. Do not treat the indigenous native language as minority and minimize languages. Learn from students' knowledge and experiences. Create your own pedagogical material for bi, tri, multilingual context. Cooperate with colleagues to make up for the lack of material. And turn on the motivation to learn English language. Raise the awareness of the local public entities, for example, Ministry of Education, about the need to cater for the specific teaching and learning needs of teachers and students in this country. Raise awareness of community and authorities about the needs of rural, Black, indigenous people.
Thank you, Mariela. That's If you can hear me, then it would be a good moment for you to share a success story with your students.
Okay, about the success story, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so the lack of local materials for teaching English, well, as I said, is one of the biggest challenges that every teacher who works in this context has. And that was the main reason to start my school's innovation project that considers the production of readings with the stories and customs of the area. Thanks to this project, I found a way out for my students that involve their culture and their native language as a part of the main strategies to better their English language communicative competence. As a pedagogical coordinator of the English area, as I mentioned before, I decided to create a teaching innovation project called Designing Posters related to local festivities in order to foster the communicative competence of the English language, promoting inclusion and interculturality. In order to achieve this goal, I guided the English teachers team to elaborate different types of text for each festivity, which integrates indigenous cultural components such as dress, food, authentic artifacts, music, and dance, will likely include opportunities for students to share their experiences in terms of culture and context and to participate in cooperative learning tasks. I selected a range of the main local festivities. I like to mention some of them: the Andean New Year, as we say here, Aymara, Año Nuevo Aymara, the Casane Festival, el Festival de Casane, the Capancho festivity. So here is el Santo Patrón, San Francisco de Borja, All Saints Day, el Día de Todos los Santos. Each lesson has some activities for basic English, pre-A1, A1, with the dress cultural sustainability in order to keep the Aymara culture alive. It's important to teachers, especially those who teach in countries with indigenous populations, the adaptation of their lesson plan in order to teach to all students the importance of learning about and preserving their culture and the cultures throughout the world. My students enjoy sharing their cultures, their customs, they feel important, and they expose their stories in an open auditorium and have the attention of their classmates, parents, and the educational community. They proudly show their photos, their stories of each festivity they celebrate in their town. So here it's important that we have learned that to get involved in our students' culture, we need to show colleagues, we need to show respect for their native language, custom, and foster their confidence, pride, and motivation on language and culture.
Thank you, Mariana. That's so true. I'm curious about what kind of materials do you use, or how you create your own materials?
Okay. Here in the Peruvian public schools, the Ministry of Education, Minedu, proposes an English platform called Aprendo en Casa, with specific lesson plans and strategies that the teachers have to develop with the students. However, the teachers can add some strategies that they consider necessary for our English classes. Some teachers think that it's difficult because we have to follow the lesson plan and there is not enough time to make adaptation according to the specific need of the context. But I think we can do it. Teachers' teamwork is the key to success. As mentioned before, we elaborate different types of text for each local festivity. which integrates indigenous cultural components. I selected a range of the main local festivities, and all the lesson plans are in accordance with the Peruvian national curriculum for the English area. They consider all the competencies and capacities according to the English program. For example, here in the reading stage, the teacher presents the selected reading related to the local festivity. For example, Aymara New Year, with selected vocabulary according to the student's level of language, following the methodology corresponding to the communicative approach and the didactic process of the reading used in the English area. And next, in the writing stage, we follow the writing process with this material, pro-writing, drafting, revising, editing, and publishing. Students work in groups of 4 or 5, write their own short story using as many of the words from the pre-reading activity as possible. A poster is then made to display key vocabulary words such as traditional activities, customs, values, and beliefs. It includes Aymara words and obviously English. And finally, in speaking stage, that is the last stage for each lesson plan, students in groups read their posters with a cultural story about the festivity. And here they use vocabulary that they have recycled to tell the story of their own. And teachers give them speaking online in order to help them with their public exposition, where parents and students attend. And using these lessons will expose the students to their culture and geography. So teachers can also adapt these lessons to make them better relate to local indigenous culture. Despite the future loss of an indigenous language, the roots of that indigenous culture can be preserved through the learning of another language such as English.
Thank you, Mariela. We have now Rodrigo on the line, so maybe Alicia would suggest that you go back in the slides and let's compare Rodrigo's context now. Let's invite all teachers in the audience to compare Mariela's context to Rodrigo's context now. Yeah,
that's a great idea, Ralph.
Ralph, can we just, sorry, Alicia, can we just make sure that everybody can hear Rodrigo? Rodrigo, can you test your microphone?
Oh, yes. Can you listen to me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can listen to you.
Yeah. Can you hear Alicia, Rodrigo? We can hear you.
I can hear you. I can hear you, Rodrigo.
Not at all. Can you speak again, please?
Alicia, I'll relay the questions to you. So what would you like to Rodrigo? What would you like Rodrigo to talk about first? So Rodrigo,
this is the first question.
Perfect. Thanks, Alicia. Rodrigo, can you tell everybody how you became involved in teaching in intercultural context? What's your teaching context?
Okay. So first of all, hello everyone. I see that there are many people here from Brazil, Cuba, Peru, Argentina. So I greet everyone. How I became involved in teaching intercultural context. From 1997, I got involved with the teaching and learning of English, and the classes were very heterogeneous regarding to education level, social class, gender, race, sexuality, age. So even I did not know much about interculturality by that time. I felt I should be open to dialogue with so many different identities and intersectionalities. By that time, I felt that my students wanted to be not just a second or foreign language learner, but they eager to express themselves in a non-native language. And 10 years later, in 2007, I was invited to be part of the professors team in an intercultural education course for indigenous teachers at a Brazilian federal university to teach English in an intercultural bilingual perspective. I mean, English would be the third or fourth language for the students in multilingual classrooms, up to 15 different languages involved. Brazilian native peoples coming from all around the country, bringing their languages, cultures, and worldviews. So, of course, some questions arise, such as how to teach a language in a bilingual intercultural perspective located in a sociolinguistic complex environment. In this case, in multilingual and cross-linguistic classrooms. How to communicate with my public in a multilingual context, knowing English is their third, fourth language. What kind of pedagogical materials should I use? What type of methodology, method, approach, and teaching instruments should I apply and work with? And how, of course, how to teach a major global, international, globalized lingua franca language as English, respecting the indigenous sociolinguistic realities. Well,
excellent. Thank you, Rodrigo. What about, if I move on to the next question, what about the big challenge of working in bi, tri, or multilingual contexts? What is your experience of that? What's the main challenge?
As I was saying before, the teaching context in Brazil is very heterogeneous. If indigenous or non-indigenous, students in general come from different backgrounds with different culture habits and, of course, different languages and multiple identities. And I mean, for this process within which several languages coexist in the classroom space, maybe the biggest challenge, it was the building and development of a multilingual knowledge database. And in this base, it would be included from the research and selection of reading, oral, and semiotic textual genre from the indigenous universe, produced and mediated in English, to the study, documentation, and analysis of the phonetic part, the word formation, the formation of sentences in the indigenous languages involved, in English and Portuguese, of course, in order to allow this reflection on the sociolinguistic situation, on the exchange of knowledge, and on the use of translinguistic and intercultural clues in the teaching and learning process of the English language. So I think maybe another big challenge was to give equal value to each of the mother tongues, cultures, and identities involved in the English teaching and learning process. And the use of linguistic, sociocultural, and subjective knowledge and experience from indigenous, rural, Black environments in the classroom to teach English, it was something that I had to learn first from them so I could teach the English language from their perspective. So introducing the English language in a contextualized way, using the aspects from students' context, such as traditional festivals, handcrafts, gastronomy, songs, identities in general. That is, using knowledges where they could recognize and feel valued in their language, cultures, and experiences. It was all of this a big challenge to me, because I had to think the English language as an instrument, as a tool to discuss local indigenous knowledge, as well as Western and universal knowledge, and to think the English language at the service of their culture, of their language, and of course of their knowledge in general.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. I think you've already touched upon this, but is there anything else you want to say about sharing a success story that you've had?
Sure. I think that the building of motivation and confidence and proud among the students, using the students' knowledge and experience, and when they got to know that their language, culture, and knowledge were as important as the language we were trying to teach and learn, I think that it was that was the biggest success I can tell you. And because of the building of that motivation and that confidence, we were able to produce by multilingual pedagogical material to be used by themselves and other colleagues, as well as at the indigenous schools. And I think that it was an important part of this process, because when I started to teach at this intercultural, multilingual context, it was very difficult to find pedagogical material where we could rely on. So, and there wasn't material at all. So at the time that we got to know and recognize cultural specific and linguistic specific from indigenous context in order to engage into the teaching and learning of English towards a meaningful learning, we motivated the students not only to deal with their own mother tongue and with the English language, but as well as they engaged into the production of bi-trilingual material in the indigenous native language, in Portuguese, and as well as in English. So I think that's it. And another thing that I could say that I learned a lot of things besides of their language, a little bit of their culture, their worldview, and this kind of thing change our perspective of teaching and sharing experience. And I mean, being involved with the students' knowledge, culture, language, and worldview helped me a lot during my path as a professor at the university. And it was pretty interesting in this sense, for example, to create an environment for diversity and sustainability, not only environmental or ecological or green sustainability, but also social sustainability, cultural, linguistic, historical, territorial, and of course contributing to an intercultural and transdisciplinary way of teaching and learning. And that it is possible, in my point of view, from the dialogue between among cultures, among different worldviews.
Thank you, Rodrigo. I think what we're going to do now is move on to questions from the audience. We've had a lot of people who've been present with us today sharing their experience, which has been fascinating to read. Thank you very much, everybody, for doing that and continue to do that. But we do have some questions, but a lot of questions as well. Unfortunately, we won't be able to ask you all of them and have them answered. But I think what I'm going to do is probably call first upon Mariela again to answer a question, and then we'll come back to you, Rodrigo, to ask another question, to answer another question. So the first question, which I'm going to ask Mariela to address, is from Izora from Cuba. And Izora says, interculturality has come to be a very important component of education. What suggestions do you have so as to integrate interculturality in the teaching and learning process, to really embed in the whole process, or when it comes to designing specific lessons or sections? Mariela, if you're there, can you answer that?
Yeah, I don't know, Ralph, if you can repeat that question, please.
Yes, of course. Ralph, you might have to repeat that question. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, I can't see the question really. So can you repeat that?
Sure. So Izora from Cuba said interculturality has come to be a very important component of education. What suggestions do you have so as to integrate interculturality in the teaching and learning process, to really embed it, or when it comes to designing specific lessons or sections of lessons?
Yeah. Did you hear that, Mariela? They're asking for suggestions to embed, interculturality in the lessons.
Okay. I think so. As teachers, we have to listen what the students have to say. Ask them questions about their culture and festivities. Building open dialogue by creating atmospheres of trust and respect for diversity, and building strong relationships with your students. I think that being aware that each community has its own way of learning, speaking, and spreading their knowledge. This community possesses a wealth of wisdom that should be disseminated and valued. Aymaras, Quechuas, Shiqibos, and many more here in Peru. They are people with different cultures, customs, and of course a different way to learn. So know their context, respect their culture, and I'm sure that you can find the best way to teach them as me or Rodrigo. Be involved in the students' knowledge, cultural, language, worldview, and they feel respected, supported, and valued as individuals. Building one's confidence, pride, and motivation on their own language and culture should be the starting point to foster engagement into the teaching and learning process of the English language. And obviously, sharing experience with other teachers. Remember that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go fast, go together. This is an African proverb.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I can go to Rodrigo now for perhaps the last question, if that sounds all right, and then we'll hand over to you, Alicia, to finish the session. Rodrigo, there's a question here. Unfortunately, there's no name with the question, but the question is really interesting. I think it's what kind of it's related to the kind of educational activities that work best to foster intercultural communication in teaching. And the question is, what are the main barriers when it comes to fostering intercultural communication for students who hardly ever meet people from another culture?
Let me see if I understood the question again. Can you repeat that again, please, Graham?
Of course. So what are the main barriers when it comes to fostering intercultural communication for students who hardly ever meet people from another culture?
When we are talking about interculturality, we may talk about, of course, about other cultures, outer cultures, but in a country as Brazil, we've got plenty of different people and different languages and different cultures. We cannot generalize a Brazilian culture itself. So when we start looking to our own reality, I mean, it's of course a good thing and a good deal to look to other cultures, etc. But when my students want to get to know different cultures, the students are immersed in his or her own culture. And interculturality also means to discuss intraculturality. So if I give my students the opportunity to talk about and to discuss about his or her identities, it may be also engaging into a intercultural dialogue. I mean, if I provide an open dialogue about gender, race, age, sexuality, or any other kind of identity that my student can recognize himself or herself, it is a good way to talk about and to develop an intercultural dialogue, because we are talking about interculturality. It means talking about other languages and other cultures, but it also means to talk about different point of views and different perspectives, and this may be done inside a smaller group, inside a group that has maybe its own culture or its own worldview. I don't know if I answered the question, but I think it's very important to give equal value, as I was talking before, to each other's cultures and identities involved in the English teaching and learning process. I have an example here that came to my mind. Of course, it is an example inside this indigenous context I'm working. Sometimes we, as an English teacher, we come to the classroom with our teaching plans already formed, and we don't think, for example, what are the knowledges that my students bring to the class. And I have a very interesting real story that happened to me, that one day I got in class with my lesson plan done, and I just wanted to teach my students grammar time, like present, past, and future. And it comes up that the grammatical time in indigenous languages are quite different from Occidental languages. They actually do not have that perspective that we have of present, future, and past. In our case, for example, we can simply draw a line, a timeline, and represent the past on the left part and the future on the right part of the line. And I mean, my students, they didn't get anything from that, because first of all, they do not have that separation of present, past, and future, and they have other concepts about that. And in our case, we see past, it is an entity that it is on our backs, and future, it is ahead of us. And in their concepts, that was exactly the opposite, because the future, it will be represented on their back, because it is something that didn't happen yet, that they didn't see differently from what happens in present or it happened in the past, that it is something that I saw, so it would be represented in front of me, you know. So when we get to perceive those details, and we kind of change our perspective of teaching, because, you know, sometimes we get in the classroom with that particularly truth in quotes, and that's true. That specifically truth is not that truth in another point of view. And of course, I'm talking about a linguistic example, but we can talk about intersections as identity intersectionalities, as well as gender, race, age, etc.
Great. Thank you very much, Rodrigo. That's a really, really good answer. Now, I apologize to everybody that we haven't had the opportunity to talk about to answer all of your questions in the chat. Alicia, if you can turn on your camera, I'll put you on the screen and you can wrap up. Okay.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you. Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Mariela, and thank you, all of you, for staying with us despite the technical difficulties. I think it's been very enriching to listen to both speakers in Peru and Brazil, and to know a little bit more about how to be aware of interculturality. You know, if there's a link that will be shared in the chat, which will take you to this attendance sheet. Graham, if you can share the link in the chat. When you complete this form, you'll get a message in your inbox, in your email, and then you'll be able to download the certificate. And yeah, just before saying goodbye, I would like to remind you to go to the British Council Americas and go to New Ways of Teaching. Sign up for the newsletter. There are new materials coming every 20 days, every month, podcasts, videos, infographics, video tips, reports, webinars that will keep you updated, and you'll be able to use lots of materials for your remote teaching. So thank you everyone again, And well, see you in the next webinar. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Let's. I think Graham is back. I think he hasn't published the link for the registration page for the attendance registration.
All right.
So please.
Let's wait.
I've put the link in the. I'll put it in again. So anyone who wants a certificate, all you need to do is click on the link that I've just put in the chat, which is to an attendance register. Once you complete that, you'll get a certificate sent to you.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Rolf. Thanks, Mariela and Rodrigo, and everyone for being here today. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you very much, everyone.